want to be melodramatic, but let it be known that this is the day Paul Teutul Sr. died.
This is a test. For the next 60 seconds, this station will conduct a test of the emergency broadcast system.
These men and women built the Smithsonian's biggest motorcycles, made custom bike building mainstream, fought each other on television, and somehow made the whole world watch. American Chopper made them household names, but not everyone made it through. Some fell apart on camera, others lost everything after the show, and a few lost their lives. What happened behind those cameras, and what did their struggles and final days look like? From legal controversies to the deadliest accidents, these are the tragic stories of 10 cast members. The last one suffered the biggest loss. Mikey Teutul. He was the only person in that building who never started a single fight, yet somehow ended up being the most broken one of all. Everybody loved Mikey. And that was the case from the very beginning. While his father and brother threw chairs and slammed doors at each other, Mikey Teutul was the one who kept showing up with a smile, cracking a joke at exactly the right moment to ease tension. Many believe he was the one who prevented the entire building from collapsing. Mikey Teutul was the heart of the show, and fans responded in unexpected ways. He was never meant to be the star, but he became one anyway. However, it seemed fate had tragic plans on the horizon. But before that, Mikey had started working at the family's original Orange County Ironworks at just 14 years old. Mike's role when the cameras arrived wasn't clear from the get-go, and that was what made his ending all the more tragic. When American Chopper became a national hit, he had transitioned into a role that nobody had a title for. He was the guy who answered phones, managed the website, swept the floor, and often got sweet-talked into building something on screen. And then came the role that defined who he was within the show. Not long after the show kicked off, it became clear that Mikey had become the buffer between his brother and father. Two men who seemed very determined to destroy each other. Many fans liked him for this, but what nobody knew at the time was that the pressure was slowly harming him. Season 6 revealed it plainly, and in December 2009, it was announced on air that Mikey had checked himself into rehab to deal with an alcohol addiction he could no longer control. And yet the troubles didn't stop there. As the senior versus junior war escalated and OCC began losing its footing, Mikey found himself caught in the middle of a crossfire that had no good side to stand on. His father eventually told him, on camera, that he had been given every opportunity at OCC and had never followed through. And though he briefly came back in late 2018, he was effectively pushed out. And still, he moved on with a smile on his face. Yet, for the cast, his exit wasn't as painful as what we're about to show you. Helen Teutul. She spent her final years watching her son and her grandson destroy each other on national television, and she passed away before either of them found the courage to stop. She never held a wrench and hardly appeared in the opening credits. So what many didn't know was that she was the heart and soul of Paul Teutul Sr.'s life. Believe it or not, there was reportedly one time he admitted she loved him in a way he couldn't describe. So when she passed away in December 2011, both father and son posed long enough to get along with each other so they could mourn her passing. Paul Jr. called his father when he heard, and what he said was the one thing that brought his father to tears. "She loved you very much. I'm sorry for your loss." Paul Sr. later said he would have preferred to have that conversation in person rather than over the phone. And in that admission was the quiet ache of a man who understood that he and his son had let something go too far and too long. She was 93 years old. Sadly, her death did not fix anything in terms of their long-term relationship. But for one episode, it briefly made both men remember that the war they were fighting was not the most important thing either of them had ever been given. Yet, not even her passing felt as sobering as what happened the following year. The man nobody talked about. On June 15, 2010, barely a year after Helen passed away, another striking tragedy was on the horizon. That day, a 26-year-old man went to work at a building in Montgomery, New York. He was a roofer employed by a Middletown contracting company, and his job that morning was straightforward: fix the roof belonging to the space that Paul Teutul Jr. had leased to house Paul Jr. Designs. This was the motorcycle shop he had launched after being fired from OCC, and the building was under construction and still taking shape. It had been barely a few minutes since the operation started, and that was the moment tragedy struck. While working, the roofer stepped backwards into a hole that had been cut in the roof. He fell over 40 feet to the ground and then passed away at the scene. Even before the news became a controversy, many things about this event stuck out like a sore thumb. For one, though it was fairly understood by most people that his name was never released for privacy concerns, it was also disclosed that none of the regular shop employees was inside at the time. Paul Jr. was not there, and the story passed through the news briefly and then faded. No tribute aired, and no episode addressed what happened. Yet, he wasn't the only young tragedy associated with the show. Cody Connelly. He was a teenager when they let him through the door. He gave that shop his best years, and the only thing OCC ever gave him in return was a reason to take them to court. What happened after the final court hearing was beyond tragic. How did this happen? Let's go back to the very beginning. While he was still a teenager going through vocational training, Cody Connelly walked into Orange County Choppers as an intern. He was so good at his job that they kept him indefinitely. He was the youngest person on the show by a large margin, yet there was something genuinely appealing about watching him work alongside industry veterans over twice his age. He made the show feel like something you could aspire to. He followed Vinny when he left OCC in 2007, and together they opened V-Force Customs. His loyalty was highly respected by fans, but what many didn't know was the heavy tensions brewing behind the scenes. OCC had owed him for most of the years he had given the shop, and even up to his leaving, they hadn't settled him. So not long after his departure, Cody filed a lawsuit against the company and against Paul Sr. He said the company owed him money for his work, hadn't paid, and was still using his image in promotional materials after he had already left. The case dragged on and became another layer of legal trouble for a company already managing Paul Sr.'s financial difficulties. Yet the mental stress came nowhere close to this next person, Rick Petco. He spent 13 years building bikes that other men got famous for. Yet the one time he rode for himself, it threatened his life and left him with a mental illness. Many long-term fans of American Chopper would describe the most trusted man in that building as none other than Rick Petco. Though he was never the loudest voice in the room and never the center of any storyline, his skills were the backbone of the show. Without his input, many believe it's fair to say the project wouldn't be half as successful as it became. His skills outlasted the drama around him, and he first came to OCC as a fabricator and stayed with the team for 13 years. Before this, he had trained as a master blacksmith and metalworker before joining the team. That foundation showed in everything he touched. Beyond that, Rick had experience across kilns, furnaces, and custom fabrication, giving him a range of experience that most of the team simply didn't have. So while the Teutuls argued about designs and deadlines, Rick was in the back of the shop making sure the build they argued about would actually function the way it was supposed to. He was the person you called when something needed to work, not just look good. Everything seemed to be going just fine for a while, but that only lasted until one major accident threatened his life. In 2009, he had a severe motorcycle accident that left him with serious injuries. These injuries forced him away from the shop for a long time. Yet fans noticed in a few episodes, though he recovered from the ordeal, it left long-lasting mental issues he would potentially deal with for the rest of his life. Despite his mental struggles, he left OCC and took his skills to a custom shop inside a Pocono Mountain Harley-Davidson dealership and kept building. Helen Teutul Jr. His father fired him, took the credit, kept the building, and made a television show out of it, and Paulie had to sit across town and watch it all play out. He was the one who made those bikes beautiful, while his father was the force of personality. Yet the bikes that ended up on magazine covers, museum floors, and in collectors' garages around the country all came from the mind of Helen Teutul Jr. He was the chief designer at OCC from the beginning, and his skill was what turned the local metal shop into a brand that the whole world recognized. So where did it all go wrong? From the very beginning, as we'll see. What many didn't know at the peak of the show's popularity was that the tension between father and son was a thing long before the cameras arrived. All the cameras did was give their frequent fights an audience. In return, the audience gave it attention and raised the stakes even higher. By season 6, it had become something that couldn't be contained or managed anymore. And by September 2008, Paul Sr. fired his son. This happened on camera and in front of the entire crew. Strangely enough, the fight didn't stop on camera. Massive legal battles followed not long after, and they would appear in court time and time again for years because of this. Paul Jr. launched Paul Jr. Designs. Senior versus Junior became its own separate series, and the fallout of what they had built together played out in front of everyone. As we're about to show you, the cost of this lingering battle was unbelievable. To add insult to injury, when Paul Jr. got married in 2013, his father did not attend. He wrote a book after that, kept designing bikes, and the work stayed good. But the version of him that existed before September 2008, that young designer building extraordinary things that many fans loved to watch, was long dead. And some losses, even the ones that eventually heal, change the shape of the person who survives them. Vincent De Martino. The day Vinny walked out of OCC, the show kept going. But anyone who had been watching from the beginning could tell that something essential had left with him and was never coming back. Vinny De Martino grew up in Hudson Valley, New York, and by the age of 9, he was already in his father's auto repair shop, watching how engines came apart and learning how they went back together. By 14, he was working at a small engine shop, and by the time he was old enough to buy a drink, he was the guy leading engineers called when they ran out of answers. The world came to know him simply as Vinny. Yet this is where his story gets interesting. He first came to OCC in 2002, just as American Chopper was being built around the shop, and the chemistry between him and Paul Jr. became one of the best aspects of the show. Vinny was calm where Paulie was expressive, patient where the shop was chaotic, and he did not need the spotlight, which made him crave it in a way that was completely at odds with what the producers had in mind. Sadly, his role wasn't meant to last, and by August 2007, he walked away from the show. By that time, he had gone as far as he could at OCC and had always wanted his own shop. So not long after leaving, he opened V-Force Customs in Rock Tavern, and Cody Connelly followed him shortly afterwards. Fans rejoiced when he came back for Senior versus Junior, working with Paul Jr. at Paul Jr. Designs rather than returning to OCC, and fans were glad. When the show ended, the custom motorcycle market contracted, and many businesses closed, but Vinny adapted. He started by renaming his company De Martino Motorsports, changing his business to automotive and truck repair, and has built a genuinely good life. Jason Pohl. He was talented, he was skilled, and he did everything right. Yet some fans hated him. Not because he did anything to harm the show, but because he had the misfortune of replacing the one guy they wanted back. In contrast with the others, Jason Pohl had a very interesting start in life. From a young age, had originally planned on joining the Marine Corps after high school. Instead of that, he won a scholarship, attended the Illinois Institute of Art, and ended up at a company called Incredible Technologies in Arlington Heights, Illinois. His work was designing animated art for a digital pinball prototype licensed by OCC. And when Pohl Sr. saw the finished product, he was impressed enough to reach out directly and invite Jason to join the team. Seeing that as an opportunity, he came aboard in early 2004 as senior designer, just as the show was reaching its peak. He joined the team that still had Pohl Jr. in it, but what he stayed for in the long term was what happened after Pohl Jr. left. So, when the firing came in 2008, the design responsibilities that had made OCC's bikes famous fell to Jason. He was genuinely talented and had a real eye for the work, but he was also the man standing in the space Pohl Jr. had occupied, and the fans never fully forgave him for that positioning, even though the decision to put him there was never his to make. The conflict that caused it had nothing to do with him, yet some fans couldn't help feeling that way, especially when OCC's bikes in the post-Pauly era looked different. They weren't bad, just not wanted. No longer wanting to be the target of hatred for what the show once lost, he slowly but surely faded from the production gradually. By the 2018 revival, he was largely absent in its entirety. But one man always stayed, yet was never acknowledged: Christian Welter. He gave that shop more than 20 years of his life, outlasting every person who ever got more screen time than him. Yet when the show ended, the world moved on without once stopping to ask what it had cost him. Christian Welter showed up in 2002, the same year the cameras did. And while everyone else in that building was either firing someone, getting fired, walking out, filing a lawsuit, or becoming famous for something that had nothing to do with motorcycles, Christian Welter always stayed. He was born on September 9, 1978, in New Jersey. He developed an early obsession with motorcycles, and it all started when he found some discarded dirt bikes, figured out what was wrong with them, fixed them, and kept going. When he had the opportunity, Welter trained formally at the American Motorcycle Institute in Florida. At the time, Welter was looking for a shop that had people as passionate as he was, not workplaces that only strive for cutting costs and making a buck at every turn. And it was a roommate at this school who told him about a custom shop in upstate New York that was doing something the way he wanted. He reached out, showed what he was capable of, and OCC brought him in. And from that point forward, he was a fixture. His job title changed over the years. From being the mechanic, he rose to head mechanic, then to the shop foreman, and then became the head fabricator. He also played drums in the OCC house band, having taken private lessons for 7 years, and was as embedded in the culture of that shop as anyone who ever appeared in the opening credits. But here is what made his story different from every other person on this list. Through every departure, every lawsuit, every season finale, and every cancellation, Christian Welter chose to stay, even when leaving would have been the easier choice. When the show finally ended and the building went quiet, he opened his own company, Serenity Cycles, near the original OCC location, and kept working. In December 2025, Orange County Choppers announced he had returned ahead of the Discovery series set to air in 2026. He had served for 20-plus years, and for most of that time, most of the people watching at home could not have told you his name. Now, let's explore the tragedies of the big man himself, Pohl Teutul Sr. This is the story the show never fully told. Everything audiences knew about Pohl Teutul Sr. started in 1999 when he founded Orange County Choppers. We all know the arguments, the management style, the arms, the mustache, and the temper. All that was the version of Pohl Sr. that America met. But that man had a life before all of that, marked by near-endless pain and suffering. As we'll see, his backstory was darker than anything that ended up on the Discovery Channel. Pohl Sr. was a recovering addict and alcoholic, as he's often said without apology. Before OCC existed, he was a man who had let substances ruin the best parts of his life. His first marriage, to Paula Teutul, the mother of his children, ended in 1995 after 26 long years of endless struggles. The years surrounding that were not easy either, and when he finally got sober, he built something substantial. He recruited his son, hired people he trusted, and turned a steel business into a motorcycle company that became a television phenomenon watched by millions of people. By the time audiences met him, the addiction was behind him. Then, in 2010, not long after the final fight with his son on camera, Pohl Sr. suffered a heart attack that forced him to take stock of what his body could handle after a lifetime of hard work. In 2018, as the revival was airing, he filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy. He was owing more than $1 million to at least 50 creditors, and because of this, he had to sell his seven-figure estate in upstate New York and move his work to Florida. He opened the OCC Roadhouse and Museum in Pinellas Park in 2021 and has been filming a new series for Discovery since. That is the story that has been harder to tell than any argument that ever aired on television. Now tell us, which of these people stayed with you the longest? Is there someone from the show we missed? Tell us in the comments. If you want more stories like this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the next video on your screen. Until next time, take care.